From the Meyers Manx to the Baja Bug, kit cars went beyond the buggy, with sports cars, hot rods, and even race cars. The versatility of the Volkswagen Bug knows no bounds or roads.
So this is part 2 of Volkswagen Type 1 history. And we kind of talked a little bit about how versatile the platform is, where you had lowrider guys, hot rodders, drag racers, everyone kind of customizing VWs, but this is going to take it a step further because we're going with basically now it's just stripping it down to the pan and the motor in the back and what can you build on top of it basically for a Volkswagen.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Exactly, because we're going with Dune Buggies, the Meyers Manx, Baja Bugs, and then taking it back to the streets, we're going to be kind of looking at some of the what's termed the Volksrods, which are kind of like the hot rod, traditional high boys and low boys and customs of the Volkswagen scene. So we're going to be going a little bit all over the place, but that's just showing the versatility of this platform over the last 80 years or something like that, and
Right.
It's still evolving a little bit even today. So let's kind of go back again, I think, to World War II.
Right.
Obviously, after that was kind of the foundation of getting the Volkswagens imported into the U.S. And then being manufactured.
Correct.
Specifically for the U.S. market. And it's a very similar thing with the off-road side of it with dune buggies. Because obviously, as we know, Jeeps
Right.
were plentiful after World War II, and a lot of the soldiers had experience with taking them on,
Right.
off road, and
They kind of knew
all
what
around
they
the
could get away
country.
with. Right.
They knew how to work on them, knew how to fix them up.
Right.
You saw the same pattern with motorcycles and Harleys.
Yeah.
And so the Jeeps became very popular. People modifying them, doing a little more to make a little bit more off road friendly and a little more versatile. And obviously, you start getting into the 50s. Maybe some of those are harder to find or they're more expensive, and some people would start doing it with Volkswagens.
Well,
Some
again,
of the surplus
Yeah.
Volkswagens that were either being brought over or available, and they kind of realized you can throw a skid plate and a couple mods on it and kind of almost do anything a Jeep can.
well, that was the fun thing about them is that, for one, they were cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, they're plentiful and cheap. And usually when you have that combination, you're
And
going to get
someone with
to do
some
it.
creativity.
Right.
That's how hot rods came about. That's how lowriders came about. Mini
Right.
trucks, you name it.
Yeah.
That's kind of the pattern of automotive, trends, if you will.
Exactly. And it took a little while, too. I mean, it wasn't like the 50s. These guys were cutting up 49 Beetles.
That's the thing.
Was...
They were still fairly
Yeah.
new at that time, so maybe some mild modifications, nothing too crazy. But what is really interesting, and obviously we talked about the Cal look, Cal style, starting California.
Right.
A lot of the early, they're called dune buggies for a reason.
Sure.
A lot of the stuff, started in California as well, or
Right.
the West Coast because of the sand.
Yeah.
You didn't want necessarily a four-wheel drive vehicle
Right.
in the sand.
Right.
You took one of the World War II Jeeps out into the sand dunes, you'd probably get just buried.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's just too heavy in the front, whereas a mid-engine rear, weight Volkswagen, a little more power, some paddle tires or something like that, and you could actually maybe get up one of those dunes.
Well, let's go back to that. In the 60s, surfers actually were the
Yep.
kind of like the degenerates or the lesser
The
people.
outsiders.
The outsiders,
Yeah.
right? So, those guys, too, were also very creative.
Mm-hmm.
They would kind of pick up with what they had and try to work with what they had. So, obviously, we've heard of the word dune buggy before, and I'm sure most people have heard of Meyers Manx. But
Yeah.
do they know that there is a guy named Bruce Meyers,
Yeah.
that was actually a professional surfer at the time? That was the actual kind of father of the Meyers Manx.
Yeah. No, and that's what, he was kind of looking at what all the surfers were doing, what all the off-road guys were doing, and seeing, okay, how can I make something that's a production specifically geared towards this market?
Right.
In that kind of started in, he came around in the 60s, in the late 50s, in Oceana,
Yeah. Which Pismo
California,
Beach.
which is Oceana Dunes,
Yes.
Pismo Beach. If you're into off-roading, you kind of know what that is, or at least on the West Coast. But he had a damaged, a banged up Volkswagen.
Right.
Took the pan, shortened it, snubbed it a little bit, and then he ended up working with MP, who was coming out around that time.
Yeah, right.
And they basically created the first production dune buggy called the Sportster.
Right.
And then, those were kind of those kits that were maybe like being sold to modify them or this and that. And then, once you start jumping into the 60s with Bruce Meyers, you're getting now full conversions or full bodies essentially to place on these.
Now, let's clear something up here too, because I think I've heard the story where he tried to build the car himself before, even prior. He knew about changing a pan, but he tried to make them all one piece, like a monocod, style deal. But it was just too expensive. So the Volkswagen pan conversion made more sense.
Yeah, and that's what, because he had done, about a dozen or so, like prototypes. Yeah. And so a lot of those, were that. And that's the thing is, okay, you're going to build a purpose-built vehicle and all. Are you trying to become a car manufacturer, or can you make some parts and do conversions and stuff like that? So, I mean, he started out with those 12 prototypes. Eventually, throughout the years, there would be 6,000 Meyers Manxes produced. Unfortunately, though, he patented it, and then basically was told he couldn't patent it. It was too, I guess, generic or too universal to do it. So there were a lot of copies that came out, and he tried to take a lot of them to court, and didn't really work out. So the company kind of restructured many times over the years, and currently right now they're doing some EV stuff or doing modernized versions, but you can still get like a heritage Meyers Manx.
Well, Old Red I think is his first one. That was like the prototype that was kind of the big deal. And of course, like you said, there's 6,000 Meyers made, but there's probably 600,000 copies.
No, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, even we mentioned, Empy.
Right.
They even made their own version, the Imp, and it was a little bit different styled, stuff like that. But essentially it was just now we can just make fiberglass bodies that are just tubs basically to put on these Volkswagen pans, and there you go.
But here's the thing to remember too. The 60s was the age of fiberglass.
Yeah.
So this is when anybody could try out anything.
You look at the hot rods of those time periods, Ed Roth and George Barris, the crazy kind of designs and stuff. And there was some similarities there of like the curves and the dips and the tubs and stuff like that. Yeah.
But I mean, that's kind of everybody just was trying whatever they could to, hey, look, this is the style that I want to produce.
Yeah.
Well, I can be a car builder. That was what was so amazing about it. And again, too, Southern California was full of these guys. Everybody from Dean Jeffries all the way to Bruce Meyers, they were making these things. I even know this too from building boats, where even that lamination process of fiberglass was a new process that even the U.S. military was using for wings. Yeah. And, Rudy Ramos was the first guy to actually take that and take a wooden boat and then make that into a fiberglass boat. So that process was really new then. And that's why so many people were trying it.
Yeah.
So many places.
It's the innovation that always drives, the hot rodding world, the customizing world. And we were seeing that in multiple different areas. The Meyers Manx, those dune buggies were geared a little bit towards the off-road world.
Right.
And in the first, not Baja 1000, because it was originally called the Mexican 1000.
That's right. Yeah.
But Meyers Manx competed in that and won.
They won,
its class.
right? Yeah.
And it was actually there was a cover on Hot Rod magazine showing a Meyers Manx in 1966.
Isn't that cool?
So that's you look at that that's not a hot rod, but essentially it was at that time.
Well, and another thing to back up to that. Now you got to remember there was what's his name, Hickey, that created the Baja boot that was kind of similar to a Volkswagen-ish looking thing, like a dune buggy, right? It had the large Terra tires on it, but it was V8 powered.
Yeah.
Right. So I think what they learned from that was it was too heavy.
And that's, might be too either they're trying to restrict the weight down. When you're doing some of the desert stuff or the dunes, you're not necessarily trying to go 4-wheel drive. You're You're just looking for speed
Yeah.
and suspension, basically.
Exactly. And I mean, and this was also a pop culture icon because I mean, I can even remember a Saturday morning cartoon called Speed Buggy.
Yeah,
and had like a Meyers Manx, kind of look to it.
Yeah.
And that's something like, so it went from 8 to 80. Basically, anybody that was, interested in automotive
And
stuff.
it's got a very
cool.
unique look.
Yeah,
You know, compared to just a regular dune buggy or something like that. And there's guys taking them out on the streets and making lower kind of versions of them, like more streetable versions that weren't with the big crazy off-road tires.
Exactly. The drag racers guys loved them because now you're taking half of the weight out of the car. Obviously more power to weight, so they're looking at that as being an advantage. So a lot of those things ended up on the drag strip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Very
mean,
common.
what is kind of funny though, and there's like a picture of if Bruce Myers, jumping one of these, and I don't know if it's the angle, but I don't think the roll cage is going to work too well.
Yeah, exactly.
Might be the angle.
Yeah, right. It's probably the angle. Yeah.
But they didn't really have a lot to them.
No.
I mean,
No.
It was as basic as almost you could get. I mean, essentially just a larger go-kart.
Right.
You know, but that's, a lot of people started customizing these.
And we should clear up one thing too. It's a Manx.
Yeah,
meaning
not a minx.
Meaning a tailless cat.
Yeah, we had to look that up because I always thought it was a Myers Minx, as in like the fox,
Right. Like
kind of thing,
like a weasel looking thing.
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, all right, makes sense.
It's more like a
an animal.
bobcat. Yeah.
But no, it's essentially a tailless, cat.
Right. Which made sense with the style. They cut off the rear apron of the Volkswagen.
Well, that's
and
you're
made
going
it look-
for
right.
your departure and angle and stuff like that. So you need a little more ground clearance in those areas, and
Right.
made sense. And then obviously that kind of led the style of it. And that's actually what their little logo was. It was a little cat. Was
Exactly.
the Manx cat.
Right.
And obviously, so they were becoming extremely popular. But even after, making them just the kits, basically, you're not making them, with the Volkswagen pan, they were still pretty expensive.
Right.
For that time period. And so, like you said, when there's some people with some resources, creativity, and not maybe a lot of cash, you'll have something new come out.
That's true.
And that was the Baja Bug.
Right.
So that essentially, that's been directly traced back to, specific builder, specific guy. And if you know the name Emery or Emery Motorsports in the Porsche world,
Yep.
that family lineage a little bit. So let's kind of go back a little bit because Gary Emery is credited with creating the first Baja style bug.
Correct.
And that was done in 1967, 68, so around the same time that
All the off-road stuff's kind of
the
exploding.
Baja was, or Mex 1000 was getting very, we're just starting out basically.
Yeah.
The Manx was competing in that.
Hot VW's magazine also debuted that
That's
year
true.
in 67.
Yeah, and it was Dune Buggies and Hot VWs.
That's correct.
Not just.
Yes.
And like if even the first issues was
Dune Buggies.
equally
Yeah.
Dune Buggies and Hot VWs.
Yeah.
Later on, it was like, hey, Dune
Smaller-
Buggies.
yeah.
Yeah. But they were, him and his father, Neil Emery, they were working at a Porsche dealership, Porsche Volkswagen dealership
Yes.
in Newport Beach, Iverson Porsche.
Correct.
And so essentially you had Neil Emery, who was one of the original customizers
Right.
in Southern California.
Yeah.
The SoCal Speedliner or Streamliner.
Yep.
Numerous customs.
Valley Customs. All
Yeah,
this,
he owned Valley Customs in Burbank.
Right.
And, so metal fabricator, customizer, knew, his way around that. They ran the body shop there at
Correct.
the dealership. So essentially they could kind of just, mess around and
slide
create some
something
stuff
in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, had access to some parts and stuff. So, but apparently the story goes is that a Volkswagen, Type 1 came in there, front and rear were both smashed
Right.
up. And rather than, obviously kind of just tossing it aside, they go, oh, well, we can just cut the front end off,
Right.
cut the rear end off,
Yeah.
do some modifications, some bumpers, some lights, lift,
Add different size tires.
different size tires, and basically you're kind of creating something that looks and acts like a Meyers Manx, but is still a Volkswagen.
Right. Yeah.
And and they even took it a step further with taking taking the side glass out and making
window nets, stuff
kind
like
of window
that.
nets, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it was definitely,
It was the Volkswagen version of the Dune Buggy.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was a still Type 1 sedan bug.
Right.
Dune Buggy.
Right.
Versus the Dune Buggies just being like more stripped down completely.
Sure.
So this was still streetable, had a license plate, not just for, off-roading.
Well, and that's probably where he got the idea from. Hey, I want a Dune Buggy, but I want to be able to drive it, everywhere.
Well,
I
and
want to drive it in the rain.
And that was the thing.
Yeah.
He wanted a Meyers Manx.
Yeah.
Couldn't afford it, but had some talent, had some resources, with the body shop and the parts there,
right.
and kind of just made it happen. And that family is kind of kept going on that because now obviously Rod Emery, the grandson, essentially is hugely known in the Porsche world, kind of one of the pioneers of like the outlaw style.
Correct.
Porsches, when people were doing Wall Street and Charlie Sheen and trying to be all fancy, he was, taking the older Porsches and stripping them down and making them raw.
I mean, look at where
so that's where
look at where he grew up at.
Yeah.
Right. For them to do that with the Baja Bug, because Baja Bugs became a phenomenon. Because that was like again, cheap car with somebody with a little bit of talent, or a few tools, and all of a sudden you got something cool to drive around. Because there were countless people in the '80s that would drive these things daily. A man of having 14 sedans in my lifetime, I never had a Baja Bug.
I was gonna say, you never had one of those.
But it was something to honestly, most guys would get one or two in their Volkswagen journey.
Yeah, it's just kind of one. If you're into them, you're going to have kind of some different style, a little bit of everything.
And the thing about it too is Baja Bugs were great because it showed the versatility of the car again.
Yeah.
It goes back to the versatility of the car. The car, even Mexican 1000, they had rules that you could take a stock sedan and use it through that. That same deal is still going on today throughout scores. Baja 500, Baja 1000. You can take a stock-bodied Volkswagen, which is actually a Class 11.
Yeah, so Class 11 is the stock class.
Right.
So essentially, it's anything. So it's got to have all
bumpers,
got to have everything, but
yeah.
you can do mild modifications to create ground clearance.
Exactly.
Essentially. So anything ground clearance and safety.
Yeah.
Essentially you're at,
Yeah.
and then you got Class 5, and that's split with 1600.
Yes.
So that's going to be obviously 1600 cc Volkswagen
Engines,
engine, Volkswagen-based suspension.
Right.
And then you have the unlimited
Yeah.
class, which
Right.
Those are just going crazy. But
it's fun to watch those guys because you watch those little bugs kind of just bounce. Like you'll see a trophy truck blare through things, and usually a trophy truck can go through things.
Yeah.
Right? Bugs go on top of things, and they just kind of float around, and just a lot of times you'll see a trophy truck that's stuck, and you'll see the guy kind of just putt around him and keep
that's
going.
Going to be sometimes good or sometimes bad.
Right.
I mean, your wheelbase is next to nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
So that could be either good or bad depending on what terrain you're in and
Right.
how you're doing it. But
It's definitely a tortoise and a hare situation.
that's true.
It really is.
No, and that's what's kind of fun with that and that race, especially because you got motorcycle guys going through there. You've got the bugs, you've got the crazy trophy trucks, kind of a little bit of everything. And, that definitely, that Baja style of the wider fenders, because a lot of the Dune Buggies guys were pulling the fenders off.
Completely off, right.
The Meyers Manx had obviously higher fenders, but so, they were doing the wide body stuff. So, a few companies obviously started coming out with conversion kits out of fiberglass.
Yes.
For, so be your fenders, your bonnet or your hood, your, kind of cowl and stuff like that. And so one of the companies, Miller Havens, created the Baja Bug kit.
Exactly.
And they had to do some modifications because of, I guess California, DOT or California regulations in the early 70s that, basically every car had to have the engine covered.
Right.
You couldn't have like an open hood or old hot rod kind of style. So they kind of modified some of the kit from what it originally was,
right.
In the back and stuff like that. And they had a couple different versions. So they had the narrow eye kit,
right,
which put the lights in the front,
center,
like on the front apron, kind of part of the hood, if you will,
right.
And then they had the wide eye kit where the lights were then on the fenders,
right.
on the wide body, But that obviously then allowed anybody to do that to their Volkswagen. And obviously too, in the 70s, you got to remember at that time, there was Volkswagens available that were 20 plus years old.
That's what I'm saying.
You
right.
know, so
Yeah.
that was kind of, you didn't necessarily need the one that came into the body shop crashed
Right.
to customize it. You might have found a
pick up
body,
yeah.
or you might have found a tub, or you might have, you know,
Yeah.
just had one lying around, and you're not worried about, you know, pulling it apart to throw some fenders on there and replace it.
Exactly. I mean, Baja Bugs are definitely dear to my heart. It's the first car I ever drove. I mean, I can remember going on a camping trip.
I was going to say, you said you've had over a dozen Type 1s,
Yep.
sedans, never had a Baja Bug, but
Right.
you remember being in one or driving one.
Well, that was the first
on a
car I ever
camping trip.
drove.
Okay, so that was the first car you ever drove.
Yeah.
Was a
Baja
Baja
Bug.
style Bug.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was my buddy's dad. His name was Don Senior. He had a Volkswagen Baja Bug. We went up to Ocotillo Wells.
The dunes.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, yeah.
stayed at the Ocotillo Inn. And you know, I was like 9 years old, and he goes, "You're gonna learn how to drive today." And I just got in there and stalled it probably 25 times, but I ended up driving the thing around in the dirt.
Still a Volkswagen. So
It's a
it's
Volkswagen,
like, yeah,
so
whatever.
it didn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, also too, it was
Yeah.
set
What are
up-
you gonna hit to?
What was I
you
gonna
know?
hit?
Yeah.
You know, so it was great. It was a great experience. Totally, you know, hold it dear to my heart. But I was a street guy, not an off-road guy.
No, and that's, I mean, so and that would have been in the 70s,
80s.
or early 80s.
Early 80s.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, Baja Bug stuff. You started to see too a little bit of that dune buggy style, like just be taken a step further, I guess.
Right.
You know, if the Baja Bugs are kind of popular and known throughout, well then got to take the dune buggies a step further, and that's essentially kind of where the sandrail
Correct.
came about in the 70s.
Right. Right.
So
And you would see guys that they would still use the pan, the
Yeah.
Volkswagen pan, or for a foundation, but then they would add tubing to it.
yeah, do
you
a
know.
full cage setup, do body
Right.
panels, you know, do all that, and yeah, and there was even a company called Sandrail Manufacturing.
Yep.
You know, that would essentially, you used a Volkswagen, you could also use a Corvair.
Right.
You know, people
Yeah, that
were
was true.
using
Yeah.
Corvairs in a
Yeah.
lot of these, but I think
Air-cooled.
air-cooled, mid-engine, but I think a lot of it, the Volkswagen stuff still was the most popular.
It was.
Corvairs were not as plentiful.
And they were a little more money too.
True. Yeah,
You
because
know,
they were mid-60s is when they were out, late 60s. So
yeah. So that was still kind of a
they're still-
driving car.
Yeah.
You know, but it was they also weren't as reliable in the sand as well too. The Volkswagen kind of was the reliable motor.
it's, yeah.
But you know, there were some guys though, again too, guys wanted to go fast. So
Yeah,
that
it's gonna
turned
have a little
into
bit
the
of- a little
pan
more.
with the tubing turned into just a tubing only, like what we have from here.
Mm-hmm.
A few other companies. Chenoweth is another one that comes up to my memory. Chenoweth was kind of more after the Baja racing thing. It wasn't really the Glamis Dunes racing
Yeah.
that you would see most of these sandrails that would do. But some guys would fix up those Volkswagen motors to make, you know, 150 horsepower and go to Glamis and go ahead and go drag racing. Gecko Road back then was mostly Volkswagen powered vehicles drag racing down the sand.
Yeah.
So-
Drag racing in the sand. It's got to
Right?
be always a little
insane.
interesting, especially with these. I mean, you're popping as many wheelies, if
Oh,
not more,
Yeah.
on the sand and in the dunes with these than
Yeah.
you'd see at the Anchoret,
Right.
drag race that weekend.
Yeah. Well, think about it though. When you cut down a car to basically nothing, or even make it just a tube chassis,
Yeah.
especially a small, short wheelbase with 150 horsepower, all of a sudden you've got a rocket ship.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they're after, and yeah, they're lots of fun.
Yeah.
and that's the other thing too. In Glamis, we think of Glamis now. You think of like the LS powered vehicles. You think of twin
that's-
turbos,
that's
supercharged,
what-
all that stuff.
The sandrails evolved from the Volkswagen was, I want more power,
Right.
I want to go bigger, I want to be cooler, I want faster, and also too, you weren't the talent level of off-road fabrication had gotten to the point where you weren't relying on all the Volkswagen geometry or pan and parts to start with.
Yeah.
You could just make a chassis
Exactly.
and create a chassis, and companies like Funko
Yeah.
kind of evolved into that, where it's just purpose built, full, start to finish. And hey, yeah, you might as well, when you got all the room in the world, might as well put a LS, power, or a V8 at least in there.
But the good thing about that was it took 20, almost 30 years to get to that level. For the most part, from like, let's say 1970 till about 1999, you had a Volkswagen pan, Volkswagen engine, sandrail car.
Yeah, that was the
combination
combo.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and you know, with the dune buggies and with those sandrails, I mean, especially too in the 80s and into the 90s when, you know, the U.S. military was not necessarily in the European field or Asia, you know, it was desert warfare. And so a lot of the, you know, especially leading into the Desert Storm and into Iraq in the 90s, the military started contracting out to have sandrails or dune buggies built.
Yes.
Because way more versatile out in the desert. Obviously, you needed that.
Yeah.
You couldn't get some huge, you know, troop carrier or you know, even, I mean, Humvees, but like you're not putting a Humvee out in the dunes because you're just going to sink. So.
And Chenoweth actually built a lot of stuff for the U.S. military.
They went a lot into that direction.
They got into that. Honestly, too, there was a show, I'm sorry, there was a movie called Megaforce in the early 80s. Look it up.
This is an A-Team kind of
vibe.
Oh,
it's this modern apocalyptic deal where these forces have to fight each other on the desert. It's kind of like a rip off of the Road Warrior.
I was just kind of thinking that, like, okay, so they're I've got two but
the greatest thing about it is they all fought with dune buggies. So they had like these like rocket launchers on the like. No, I'm serious.
So you just you'd start
and,
you know.
And if you grew up around here in Orange County, it's particularly Newport Beach, for 25 years on PCH, there was a Megaforce Chenoweth chassis parked right by this Army surplus store. It's not there anymore, but believe me, if you're from Newport or if you're from Orange County, you know what I'm talking about.
No, and I mean that's the thing too. Like, I mean, looking at some of these, you know, military versions where, dune buggy or sandrail, usually you had two people, you know, in the front, passenger, driver.
Right.
You know, maybe it was some of the sandrails later were like 4-seater or something like that. We can take the family, but they would create the perch on top for the gunner.
That's right.
You know, so you'd have
they're no joke.
3 people in this.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, with a 50 cal machine gun sitting on top.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's funny. I remember we'll have to look this up as well, but like in the Army now with Pauly Shore,
right?
They were like getting shipped out with a dune buggy, getting dropped off, and they had to, you know, find their way with that thing. And what's funny is I remember with that of like, they were the water boys, and one of the guys who was like gung ho, like soldier guy, he was like, well, of course I signed up to be the water delivery guy. Where do you think we're going to war at? In the desert.
Yeah.
So I'm going to see all the action.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Baja Bug Dune Buggies definitely, you could look at what a sandrail is today or 10 years ago and trace it back definitely to the Volkswagen era.
For sure.
So if you're still rocking your stock stereo system, you need some help. And you need to go to Powerbase and check out their OEM direct fit line of speakers. Basically a plug-and-play operation on any newer Chevy, Ford, Dodge, Nissan, you name it. And I actually got a full set in my Toyota 4Runner. It sounds amazing, especially considering you're basically just replacing the factory speakers. So go check them out at powerbaseusa.com. Use the code AUTOREV24 and you can get 10% off anything on the site, including these cool little Bluetooth speakers. This one right here is the Sound Cube. Clip it on your backpack, take it down to the beach. And what's really cool is this split speaker. So you can put one in the kitchen, one in the backyard at a party. Everyone's having a good time listening to the same music. Basically got like full stereo, almost surround sound system in this little package. So if you use the code AUTOREV24, you can get 10% off. So go check them out and take a listen. So you've been following along on Auto Revolution, you know that we're a big fan of Chevy OBS trucks. And Beltec Suspension has been around for 40 years, and they were one of the first innovators of the sport truck movement back in the 80s. And we've been lucky with them to partner on a few different projects, from the OBS Clash documentary series to the Tahoe Unlimited, and even a few things that we've got up our sleeves coming out later this year. What's really cool is they've partnered with us to offer free shipping if you use the code AUTOREVOLUTION24 at beltec.com. So whether it's a lowering kit on your Chevy or a lift kit on your Bronco or your Jeep, and if you use the code AUTOREVOLUTION24 at beltec.com, you're going to get free shipping. Now back to the show. So kind of back to the versatility. At the same time as these Baja Bugs were getting popular in the 70s, you know, the hot rod guys were really looking at the Volkswagens as well,
right,
in the same way.
Yeah.
Where you could take just the pan, take the, engine, and kind of almost put whatever body you wanted, or put a fiberglass body on it,
Right.
or put a older, Model A body or something on it. And you got to think too, by that time, it was getting a little bit harder to find Model A's, Model T's,
Right.
Old hot rod that weren't already customized. So, hey, let's take a look at the Volkswagens.
The 60s and 70s, again, if you're mechanical, that was the time to grow up, or the time to be alive, because there weren't any rules. Everything was about what you could do and what your abilities were allowing you to do. So guys that couldn't afford a Model A or couldn't afford a Model T, or wanted to prove a point, wanted to say, like, you know what, I'm going to build my own
I can
car.
do anything.
Right.
I don't need your catalog and your Pete and Jake's and your
I'll do it
list
myself.
of everything. I can
Right.
do it on anything and
Right.
make it look cool. And then there's a guy named Kent Fuller, in the 70s that kind of did exactly that. And he took a Volkswagen Pan, Model T bucket.
Yeah.
Did the full hood, obviously, because there's no engine there, so
Right.
you're going to hide all of that.
Yeah.
Built and kind of extended the bed of that, Model T pickup to cover the Volkswagen engine.
Yeah. Which is super cool.
And more or less, I mean, you kind of look at it, and granted, it was very of that time of hot rods where you were putting some trim on it, and you were putting
This is the age of
fancy,
Vans. Yeah, come on.
You were putting some of the accessories on it, and you had the top, and it wasn't like the sleek Boyd stuff that would come a little bit later. But they actually published the kind of the plans for that, of how to do all that, in Rod and Custom magazine back in the day.
Really, that's cool.
So, hot rod guys, legends. I mean, you say the name Brizio, whether it's Andy Brizio, Roy Brizio, whoever, that's
You
that's
think
hot
street
rod
rods.
legacy.
Yeah.
And was seeing that and started building multiples of those. I mean, they built a handful of these, Volksrods that were essentially, Model T pickups, but Volkswagen powered.
Right. Which, again, some guys, if you said that today, some guys would be like, "Oh, you poser! Like, what do you're not even building the real thing."
Yeah.
But again, back then it was like, look at what I did with a little Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Like, this is kind of a cool idea.
It's kind of like that, a little bit of that outlaw spirit.
Yeah.
Even we mentioned talking about the Emery family and Rod Emery, of taking the the Porsche angle of it and making those counter culture and a little bit outlaw style. I mean, when everyone at the hot rod show is showing up with a 32 Ford or a 29 Model A, and it's, oh, you got red one. Oh, I got a black one.
Right.
Oh, I got, 5-hole wheels. I got 8-hole wheels and stuff like that. Well, hey, now you come out with something different and innovative. And he worked with a couple different, manufacturers to kind of create these, and do these. So they got the chassis from Dragmaster.
Okay.
Got him Steve Archer.
Yeah.
Made all the bodies, all the fiberglass bodies. And created a couple, dozen of them. And then ended up selling it to Speedway Motors.
Okay.
So you had this, what was called basically the Speedway rod.
Yeah.
And that was kind of this, essentially, like we said, a Model T truck on a Volkswagen platform.
It was a great time, you guys, because think of all you're on Instagram and you're scrolling through and you see all these guys that are metal experts that are building these, scratch built metal bodied cars. Well, that's pretty cool, and you need a lot of talent to do that. Whereas fiberglass, you don't need as much talent. So it kind of, you can mess things around. You can manipulate the material a lot more. So
obviously the advantage too of fiberglass, and obviously like Speedway Motors took advantage of that, and Meyers Manx, Bruce Meyers took advantage of that, where it's reproducible.
Right.
Maybe you're making the first one out of metal. Yeah. To then pop a mold off, and now you can just crank them out.
Right.
And you can sell them to the masses.
Yes.
So that was, definitely one of the things, and they kind of, They were around. I wouldn't say that they took off necessarily.
Right,
I mean, when we say Roy Brizio built dozens of them, that's a lot.
Yeah.
For Roy Brizio, but
Right.
a couple hundred in the grand scheme of things.
They weren't like the Baja Bug.
or the Manx,
Yeah.
where you had thousands of them.
Right.
So obviously that kind of went away a little bit. I mean, there were people still customizing Volkswagens. Obviously, we covered in the last episode the cow look, which was very hot rod or drag racer inspired. So that, and also too, that more or less was the Type 1.
Yeah.
Obviously, when we're talking about the Brizio and the Fuller, Volksrods, those were still the Type 1 pan,
Right.
but they were essentially a truck.
Yeah, and that you're right, and that's more of I consider those kind of more like a kit car.
Exactly.
But there were guys that did take the Volksrod idea and like they would remove the fenders and make it look more like a highboy roadster.
Mm-hmm.
Or even a highboy coupe. I mean, I know a lot of those, but the Bug kind of has that shape. If you remove the fenders, it almost has like this.
Well, it's got a very
look.
very nose
Yeah.
dive. I mean, because that's a lot of the early hot rod guys or custom guys would pancake the hood.
Yeah.
Would try to make the profile
Like lay it
lower
down,
and more,
right.
steep.
Yeah.
And if you're slamming on the ground a Volkswagen and removing the fenders, it has that look because the front
It already does that.
and the back, just
Right.
already dives.
Yeah.
And that definitely became extremely popular much later on in kind of the rat rod and rockabilly, era of things. But I know for quite some time, like the kit car wasn't just the hot rod, stuff where essentially it's like, here's your pan. What do you want to put on top of
That's
it?
That's it.
And a lot of guys were doing stuff with more sports cars that were, more
And that kind of
street driven.
And that goes back to again what they were doing with Dune Buggies, with the Meyers Manx, with Impey, those guys in the early '60s. They figured out that this pan is so versatile, they would shorten it and they would put a fiberglass version of the 356 Speedster body on top of it.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden now you're making Porsches.
And those are, and because those Speedsters were pretty,
they're
top dollar and not
everybody-
as plentiful as a Volkswagen.
Correct. Right.
sedan.
But now with all these things available, and like you mentioned, it's fiberglass, so let's just make cookie cutter, bodies of these versions. People now all of a sudden are doing 356 conversions, or I shouldn't say conversions, but kit cars.
Kit cars, yeah.
There was
you are it kind of conversion because you're
converting a Volkswagen to a
you're
Porsche.
converting a Volkswagen to a Porsche. Kind
It's
of
like doing a GMC into a Chevy.
yeah. It's like just redraw the front logo. But you could, a lot of the parts were interchangeable even then, and then obviously engine upgrades. And a fiberglass body. So
Right.
now you had a lighter, faster,
Right.
essentially Porsche.
Well, and that was the other thing too. You could modify the Volkswagen engine
Yeah.
so much easier than the Porsche engine because parts were more readily available for
Yeah.
the VW. So you could put a 1776 and 1835 into a Speedster body, and the thing would be faster than
Exactly.
the 356 Speedster. So there was a lot of that going. And again too, some of those they took it even further and did outlaw versions of the 356 Porsches. I can remember like a fiberglass body that had square headlights in it. That if you would look at a 356 Porsche, you'd say that doesn't look right.
Yeah.
But it had a wider stance for wider wheels, and they would like race Mulholland with that stuff.
No, and there actually was a Mulholland look.
Yeah.
That was termed kind of off the cow look and all that, where it was obviously
square headlights
obviously
and the square
Mulholland
tail,
Drive is like Porsche.
Yeah, that's the
Kingdom.
icon, right? Yeah.
But so guys were doing the wide body, more kind of canyon carver kind of style, Volkswagens with that. And even Bruce Meyers, with the Manx, they created the Manx. Yeah.
I know. There you go.
That's one.
Right.
The Manx SR,
Yeah.
which was kind of their speedster version,
Right.
if you will.
Yeah. Sports cars were natural for it though too. One that comes to mind for me because it was more of a gentleman's sports car, a Volkswagen. It wasn't. It was a kit car, but it was a kit car that came assembled. So there was a company called Bradley that actually came out with the Bradley GT that was based off of Volkswagen pan and Volkswagen running gear, but then they would build a body around it that you would pick your color, you'd pick your upholstery, you do your thing.
Yeah.
And they would sell them as new manufactured cars. which I thought was kind of funny because you're not getting a new pan, you're getting a used.
Oh, and so it was still
vehicle.
a refurbished or
Right.
or
remanufactured.
Yeah.
Yes. So you get your blue tag.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the first kind of version of, well, why not make the poor man's, they had the poor man's Porsche. Why can't they have the poor man's sports car out of a Volkswagen?
Yeah.
So, and they weren't crazy popular, but they were popular enough to get a manufacturer off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they manufactured those for a few years. I'm not really sure how many numbers. That might be kind of obscure, but I can remember being in traffic and seeing a few of them driving around, the South Bay and that kind of stuff back in the 80s. So they were around. Bradley also, they had other people. Like there was the Mantra GT, which I remember it as the Coyote from a TV show called The Manta, right? Yeah,
it?
something like that.
Yeah.
I just remember it as the Coyote from a TV show called Hardcastle McCormick, which was actually it was on like
I've never seen that show, but I know the car.
Right.
Yeah,
and that was Volkswagen powered
about.
as well. That was something that they actually modified because the true car wasn't Volkswagen powered, but for the TV show, because of course they were having it doing jumps and that kind of stuff, they had to go to a Volkswagen powered. So that was another kind of like high visibility Volkswagen project you would see on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Right.
No, exactly. No, and there's some like racing. Obviously Baja racing was still going on. There's Porsche racing going on, but I know that there's some Volkswagen racing going on as well.
Yeah. Formula V is a huge thing. So Formula V was invented in New Zealand. And basically at the time in the 60s, it was, what can we race, right? And back then Formula One and GT racing was big in the English, countries, if you want to call it that. So for New Zealand to be a fan of Jim Clark and those guys racing F1 cars in the 60s made a lot of sense. Think about it. Bruce McLaren cars came from New Zealand. Yeah. So it was a big scene. But again, too, being in New Zealand, there's not a lot of cars available, and Volkswagens were the car that was forgotten about. So again, they stripped down that car from a full-bodied sedan down to the pan, and then of course built their own bodywork around this for some type of aerodynamics. And they limited them though. They limited them to a 63 and earlier pan.
Okay.
Right.
What was the reason for that?
I think it was just because that was kind of what was available. There's no mechanical reason.
I was going to say, yeah.
For a 64 still a transaxle, so it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But the rules are 63 and under, and also too, I believe it has a CC limit. I think it's like maybe 13 to 1500 CCs. You're not allowed to have any type of downforce whatsoever. So no wings, no canards, none of that stuff. But that's what makes the class so competitive, because everybody's the same.
Well,
right?
that's
It's momentum.
you're kind of going after driver talent at that point. When you're a little bit limited on what the car can do, it's then up to the driver.
Right, and that's why.
And that's going to get people in. You're going to see who's going to be the better driver.
Yeah. Right. And so everybody, from the likes of Niki Lauda, from Emerson Fittipaldi, from all the way up until, God, I want to say maybe even Daniel Ricciardo was the last guy to use or to be currently on the F1 grid. That's from a Formula V, a standpoint, or I should say starting point. But yeah, that was your way into F1 racing, was Volkswagens.
And that's, you got to start somewhere with something smaller. We have dirt track, sprint cars that kind of lead into NASCAR racing, and it's the same thing that you're going to have with you're not going to be a kid getting dropped into a F1 car, to learn how to race. You got to start small.
You got to start.
You got to build up to the $300 million, cars basically.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about Formula V2 is it's still affordable. Because you have, maybe not as affordable as it used to be, because trying to find a 63 pan. But, they did, there's a super class now there's an SC class, which they've recognized the water pumper Volkswagen engines. So your Beetle engines, your GTI engines.
Yeah, the newer stuff.
Yeah. That's now, they have a class for that. But it's still based off of a Volkswagen pan, just with a water pump motor in it. So.
No, and that's the thing too. We've kind of, all of these seem to have been based on the VW pan, VW engine.
Right.
And there's also a flip side to that where VW pan, no engine.
Right.
Motor.
Yes. Oh, this is true.
Because it's
popular.
a very popular EV swap, probably the most, probably the easiest and most popular for EV swaps has been Volkswagens.
Well, it's a lightning bug. Come on.
Exactly. and we talk about EVs as a very current topic. We've traced the history a little bit. In the 60s, obviously in the very early years, people were doing electric cars. Then in the 60s and 70s, GM and other companies were prototyping and toying around with it. But there was companies in the 70s that were doing EV swaps. I don't think they weren't called EV swaps. They were just electronic, bugs and stuff. But there's a couple like Corbin Gentry, which sounds like a elevator company, which might be an elevator company. Right, yeah. I mean, makes sense. The motor. Yeah. And King Engineering, they made electric bug kits. Okay. That's what they were termed. Yeah. Electric bug kits. And yeah, you're just taking out the engine, bolting the motor up to the transaxle. Yeah. But unfortunately at that time it was all lead acid batteries and you needed a few of them. So you weren't, wasn't a ton of room and stuff like that, but it was something people were doing.
Though I'm kind of bummed that they didn't really go mainstream even back then, because that's the perfect platform for an EV. Something small, something that
especially if you're in Europe or something with your, or even just a Fiat or a Mini Cooper, like that small package.
Just even the construction though, it has a pan. It doesn't have a crazy frame. It doesn't have anything that would be obstructive to line the batteries. The engine's in the back or motors in the back. The car's lightweight, but still it carries, a good amount of cargo and a good amount of people. So, I mean, to me, that's a perfect little commuter car.
No, and that's what, I mean, there's companies now that have been doing that for a long time and made their name. So like a company called, EV West, where you can legitimately go on their site and any Porsche, any Volkswagen, any Carmen Ghia, you can get a bolt-in kit with everything you need, including the lithium-ion batteries, and including some controls from a Prius. So it's all some OEM technology, right? And literally, probably in a day, bolted in to your Volkswagen. So how much
is that though? That sounds expensive.
Yeah, so an EV West kit for going into your Type 1. Yeah. Turnkey. It's got only have a 90-mile range, but I mean it's a Volkswagen.
You're not going to Vegas in a Volkswagen. Yeah.
But it has regenerative brakes and all that. I mean, so we're talking everything you would need for it, and it's about a little over $20,000.
Oh, that's not bad.
So
I'd expect that to be more.
And that's the thing. That's the motor, the batteries, all the controls, the regen brake. I mean, literally everything you would need for it. So, and it's all turnkey, gives you instructions. So, but yeah, you can put that in a Porsche and anything like that.
If I had a Porsche.
or the poor man's Porsche.
Poor man's Porsche.
Which is the Volkswagen. So, I mean, and that's, the versatility still has continued to this day with the Volkswagen. We mentioned the Volksrod kind of kit cars, but as still those hot rods and desirable hot rods became just priced out of anybody's, budget, right? Especially in the late 90s and into the 2000s. I mean, when guys are doing $100,000 hot rod builds on TV and stuff like that, the rat rod era and rockabilly and like the more traditional hot rods started to really become popular as like the alternative. Yeah. Where the younger guys were looking to go, well, I want to do what the guys in the 50s were doing, and racing these things on the dry lakes. I don't want to be the old guy popping his lawn chair up at a cruise night. I want to have fun with these things. So guys were doing, the traditional hot rods and the rat rods, and that really carried over too into the Volkswagen.
Oh, for sure.
With those Volksrods and stuff like that, where, just pull the fenders off, guys were chopping the tops. Yeah. And then extending, the front axle up about, 8 or 10 inches. Yeah. And putting taller tires,
putting
on
like
it
the old
that
school
wouldn't
wires.
fit. Yeah. White walls and all that. Yeah. They wouldn't fit under obviously the
fenders.
But now you got no fenders. Yeah. and that also allowed you to, without the fenders and all there, slam these things on the ground. I mean, they were inches off the ground on these things.
But see, that's where Volkswagen people are a different breed. Okay,
there's
even
always
the guys,
a lot of innovation throughout.
Because you'll have the guy you'll have the guy that's Mr. Innovation that'll make a Volkswagen into a Swiss Army knife, or you'll have the guy that I have to have the period correct Bud vase in my 58.
No, I mean that's what we mentioned in the first episode of like our friend Gary Bell's Type 1. You know, it was an imported right-hand drive that like he recreated the wicker basket shelf and like everything was to a T of what it was. And then, you got guys like the Emerys that were just cutting the front off and cutting the back off and creating an off-road, kind of.
But that's what I'm getting at. Is I always look at, if you see something new in a Volkswagen, that usually means that's the next trend. Mm-hmm. Because usually like the Volkswagen guys will try something first, or they'll look at it as, it's just a Volkswagen, I'll try it. And if I don't like it, I'll throw it away.
They're smaller, easy to work on.
Well, they don't look at it as value. They don't look at it as like, oh, that's a 59 Cadillac. You can't cut that up.
Exactly.
Right? They're like, that's a 59 Bug. Who cares? Cut it up. So that's, I think, why there's a lot of innovation to that stuff.
The joke, I remember seeing something on American Hot Rod with Boyd, and they were doing a, Model A, hot rod like they've done a million times.
Yeah.
But there was a big stink that they started with a pristine driving 29 Model A.
Right.
And whereas like, you could, at that time, especially in the hot rod world, you could go, someone could build you a body, or you could find maybe a rusted out body and build your own chassis. And they were like, oh no, we're going to take this
beautiful car and cut it all up.
Perfectly period, restored or maintained and cut it all up. And, they got a lot of crap for that. But it's the Bug is the people's car. That's what it was.
Right.
And so it's like, these are economical, these are small, but tons of potential to just kind of go crazy with them.
Well, the guy that stands out to me in this thing for current times is Blake Wilkie.
Absolutely.
And the reason why is Blake has every reason to have a sandrail. Right? I mean, he's essentially put a body over a sandrail is what it kind of...
And that's, I mean, you look at now he's had several different, bugs and full off-road, full crazy, jumping them like crazy.
Right.
But he's been like that since the beginning. I mean, you go back to 10 plus years ago with his, viral video of him basically doing all the stuff you would do in Glamis, but doing it in
San Diego
and doing it illegally, unfortunately, you know, but, he was popping up hillsides and going over, stuff in the street with a Baja Bug.
Right. Which now think about this for a minute, because I'm probably on his same wavelength. The Baja Bug's registered.
Yeah.
The sandrail's not.
And that's, it's a
registration meets sandrail.
Yeah. What he was doing on the street wasn't probably legal, but
but the innovation was there.
The car was legal on the street.
Yes.
But that's the thing is everybody at that time was building sandrails, and they were building huge high dollar, $100,000 plus sandrails with an LS, supercharged LS.
That could pull wheelies and do
pull wheelies and go crazy. And you got a young kid who's like, you know what, let's go off road.
Right.
Let's take this Bug and go crazy with it. And it was just what he could do with it, and applying some of that trophy truck kind of technology and ground clearance and and travel.
Right.
Where it wasn't the Baja Bug where you kind of pop around a little bit.
Right.
This was essentially a mini trophy truck.
Yeah.
That he was kind of, him and a lot of these guys were creating, and it is cool to see that he's kind of kept with that.
Yeah, he stayed with that.
He's
he didn't try to graduate to a trophy truck or something. Exactly.
Yeah, he's made the Bug or the Baja Bug kind of his signature.
Yeah. Run with it.
And create a few different versions, and like I said, you look at one of them and it's got an LS in it.
Oh yeah.
It's got full travel that a sandrail would have,
it's
or a trophy
chassis.
Truck. But it's still modeled after and styled after,
And he hasn't lost that. That's the other thing too. He's not trying to
exactly.
make it look into something else. He's keeping the Baja Bug look. So it's definitely something nice. The other thing I really like about Volkswagens, to me, I think Volkswagen should be a required class to graduate high school. Follow me here.
All right, let's hear it.
Because a Volkswagen will teach you patience. It'll teach you in ingenuity. It'll teach you how to actually physically take care of something, and also it'll make sure that you'll get home. I know
So
this.
it's better than the here's an egg.
Yes.
You got to keep it for a week or
Yes.
something like that.
To me, it should be like, here's 10 Volkswagens that are broken down. The first guy that can drive it to school got the A in the class.
It's funny. I just remembered this talking about the high school thing, and this wasn't our class or anything. I think it was a few years ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But you know how there's always a senior prank.
Yes.
Ours was we took put I think it was either laundry detergent or Jello in the swimming pools.
Oh, okay.
Which they did not like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I don't think it was Jello. It might have been just laundry
suds,
detergent suds, but yeah, that was
right.
not. That was actually looked at pretty badly
Right,
because
yeah,
it took a lot to
get
it all out of there.
Yeah.
But there was a group that took I don't know if they took the whole Volkswagen or just the body maybe, but they cut it in half and then re-welded it around the flagpole.
Sure. I want to go to your school.
Yeah. So
That's rad.
like I said, versatility
Yes.
with Volkswagens
Yes.
is key. You can
Yes.
literally do anything with them. So obviously, what you said you had 14
sedans. Yeah.
What was your favorite? Describe, or what stands out the most? Like what just popped into your head right now?
My it's gonna sound really, really cliche. The car my mom gave me. It was a 67 sedan.
Mm-hmm.
It was the one I had the longest too. It's
Okay.
the one that I always would, because it was my mom's car.
Yeah.
So I was always like, okay,
You
I
kept
can't
that
sell my
one.
mom's
Yeah,
car because it's still her car.
Mhm.
Until she finally said, "Are you going to get rid of that car?" That's when I got rid of the car. Right?
Oh, so you
Yeah,
it wasn't then, oh, cool, it's mine now.
Well, because-
it was,
okay.
all right, let me sell it now.
I was building a squareback when I was 12. I bought it when I was 12,
Mhm.
and by the time I was 16, that was gonna be my car. Well, I didn't have it finished, so my mom had to give me her sedan, which she got a Cadillac, so she leveled up.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Big time.
From a Volkswagen Bug
Volkswagen
to a Cadillac.
Yeah. So that all worked out because then I got a car to drive until my squareback was finished.
Gotcha.
Well, my squareback went through how many motors
Never got
and
really finished.
finished,
Yeah.
and I blew it up how many times and ended up selling it. But my mom's 67 was always the constant. It was always, even if when I bought my Camaro, I still had my Volkswagen. When I bought my Chevelle, I had
That was the kind of car that was always
it
there.
was always the one, like
Yeah.
when someone needed to borrow a car, take my Volkswagen, right? It was always just around. And the reason why I had 14 sedans, I'd flip them.
Yeah.
It wasn't because I was Volkswagen crazy. It was because it was
No,
super
it was
easy.
something you knew how to work on.
I knew how to work on it. They would flip real easy.
Yeah.
So it was a way to make money.
Mhm.
But yeah, my 67 was the one. If I could go back and buy it, of course I sold it for $1,000, and it was painted turquoise and white, nice car.
Yeah.
And a young kid bought it. And I don't know if everybody out here listening remembers gas stations that had the in-ground hoist, where like there'd be a pole in the ground, it would lift the car up.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So he took it to have a clutch done in the car to a gas station,
Mm-hmm.
which again, you don't take a car to a gas station to have a clutch done. But
Yeah.
back-
So an oil change.
Right, yeah.
maybe
But back then you
brakes,
did.
yeah.
And the guy put the thing on the lift in the wrong spot, and so when he took the motor and transmission out of it, the car fell off the lift.
Oh, the
and it
balance was
destroyed
all.
the car. So yeah, I would
So that-
love.
you'd
to have
never
that
be
car.
able to get that
I would
car
never
back.
have that car
Yeah.
back, and that's the car I'd really out of all of my cars, that would be the one car I want back.
Yeah.
And it's a Volkswagen.
There you go. So yeah, versatility. I mean, literally endless, possibilities with that platform and with that style. And it's cool to see that all of those styles are still being kind of kept alive today. Even the Baja Bug stuff. There's a movie called the Baja Bug. There was guys that I saw at the Mint 400 that had traveled from Brazil, off-road the whole way up, to it,
Yeah.
kind of in one of those style, bugs. So it's something that's definitely stood the test of time, and it's borrowed from a lot of other genres in the automotive world, but it's definitely set its own standard as well.
As well, yes, I can definitely see that. Volkswagens are amazing, so definitely let's not see them go away.